Yella Beezy's shocking arrest made headlines everywhere. He was indicted by a grand jury for capital murder on March 18th, he was arrested on March 20th, and by March 28th, he was already out on bond. I'm Elizabeth Millner with Law&Crime. Yella Beezy's bond conditions are pretty strict. He asked the judge for just one teensy little change, but the judge put a hard stop on that request. When Yella Beezy was first charged with capital murder, he was slapped with a $2 million bail. It's a lot of money to post, even when you're a famous rapper. But then Judge Gracie Lewis ruled to reduce his bond. So the bond was slashed in half. Well, more than in half. The judge reduced it to $750,000. And obviously he posted that. But the judge had very strict rules for Yella Beezy. Don't have contact with any victim, witness, or co-defendant either directly or indirectly. And he'll remain under house arrest with electronic monitoring. According to a report by WFAA, the judge said in court, quote, "The biggest consideration was the offense, the severity of this particular offense. It's pretty egregious to watch that video, but the court also took into consideration the evidence or lack of evidence the state presented. Another concern I had was the financial statement that the defendant was to put on file. He didn't seem to take that seriously at all. That causes me concern about whether or not he's taking seriously the allegations against him." So the video that she's talking about was this video that was played in court during Yella Beezy's bond hearing. In it, you can see Mo 3, who is the victim, driving on I-35 near Dallas. He suddenly stops on the highway. He gets out of the driver's side door, looks at the car in front of him, opens the passenger door, and by that time the gunman is spraying bullets. All this while many drivers are just passing by, like business as usual. Then the gunman appears sprinting back to his car. He jumps back into the driver's side and just takes off, while Mo 3 was left to die. Another bystander was also hit during the shooting, but survived their injuries. Now, prosecutors don't claim that Yella Beezy fired the shots that killed Mo 3. They claim he just hired the gunman. More on that in a sec. So Yella Beezy was released on bond. Then last Tuesday, his defense attorney filed a motion to modify the conditions of his bond. And the request was simple. Yella Beezy just wants to attend his son's football games. In the motion, the Dallas rapper's attorney wrote, quote, "On March 21st, 2025, the magistrate court judge ordered as a condition of bond that Markies Conway be restricted to home confinement at his primary residence. Defendant respectfully requests permission to temporarily leave his residence for the sole purpose of attending his minor child's football games. This request is sought to allow defendant to be present for a meaningful family event, which is in the best interest of the child and will support continued family engagement and stability. To date, the defendant has satisfactorily complied with all terms of his condition of bond ordered by this court. To date, there has been no violations on the electronic monitor. The defendant respectfully prays that the court amend the conditions of bond." I mean, they asked pretty nicely, right? But in the end, the judge ruled against the defense's motion. So for now, Yella Beezy will remain under home confinement pending the outcome of his trial, it looks like. But who knows when that'll be because no trial has been put on the calendar yet. But Markies Conway, aka Yella Beezy, has kept busy. He made his return to social media on April 13th to promote his new song, In My Head. He took a gospel approach for this track with lines like, "Silence the noise in my mind. I've been dealing with a lot of hating on me. I've been waiting for a minute. They want to take it from me." In the video, his hair even appeared to be braided in the form of a cross. But as far as what's next for him, that's a wait and see. Because again, capital murder or any murder charge at all, especially in Texas, he's looking at life in prison if he's convicted. And again, this despite him even pulling the trigger. He's just accused of orchestrating his rival's death. Prosecutors say it was actually this man, Kewon White, who pulled the trigger. The state alleges Yella hired Kewon to carry out the hit on Mo 3 back in 2020, and Kewon allegedly had help from this guy, Devin Maurice Brown. Both were arrested and indicted years ago, within weeks of the shooting. Investigators say they can place both men through their phone records and surveillance data near Mo 3's location in the hours before the shooting. And the feds even charged both of them. Kewon was found with a 9mm gun after he fled from officers, and Devin was indicted on federal drug and weapon charges after investigators found a stolen AK-47, drugs, and cash in his home. Kewon is already serving his federal sentence. Back in November of 2022, he pleaded guilty to his charges and was sentenced to 9 years in federal prison. But in a recent video of him posted to social media, he says he's coming home soon.
I've been home soon, for real, no cap.
Let me see this. What's that? We back?
It's unclear if that's actually true. He has a lot of time left on his federal sentence. Plus, he still hasn't even gone on trial for Mo3's murder. As for his alleged accomplice, Devin Brown, he still remains in the Dallas County Jail and hasn't gone on trial either for Mo3's murder. Now, if you're wondering what's the motive, well, prosecutors haven't laid that out clearly just yet. But rumors have swirled the beef between Mo3 and Yella Beezy began years earlier in 2018. That's when Mo3's close friend Roy Lee was shot and killed in North Dallas in 2018. He's pretty important to this story. Why? Because he allegedly questioned Yella's claim on the neighborhood Oak Cliff up in Dallas, which to some is a sign of disrespect. Now, Roy Lee was later gunned down at a shopping center and died from complications from the shooting. After Roy died, Yella Beezy was shot multiple times during a drive-by. Then you have the back and forth and diss tracks between Yella and Mo3. Then Mo3's manager alleged Yella and his group attacked him while he was leaving a club. Then months after that, Mo3 was shot and killed on I-35. Even after Yella Beezy's arrest, Mo3's mom took to social media writing, "Justice for my baby." Again, now it's just a wait and see. So it's a toss-up on who will be tried first, Yella Beezy, Kewon White, or Devin Brown. So no trial date yet, no football games, and Yella Beezy remains in home confinement. Let's bring on criminal defense attorney Safa Robinson-Ferrer to get her take on this case. Safa, thank you so much for joining me. What's your take, or what do you make of the defense's motion for bond modification so Yella Beezy could attend his son's football games? Now, we know the judge denied it, but given the charge that he's facing, murder for hire, are you surprised the defense even requested that?
It's not a surprise. We actually make these requests quite often, especially when we have a scenario or a situation where, the defendant is a parent and wants to be involved in their children's matters, or, maybe there's a wedding coming up or something of that sort. So it's not uncommon at all for the defense to make requests like this. I think considering the charges, and obviously it's a murder charge in this case, the judge declined not to. And one of the things I always say is it's inconvenient to be a defendant. And this is an example of how inconvenient it can be when you are accused of a crime and ultimately want to continue to move about freely, maybe go to your child's football game, considering the charges that you're facing and the risk of flight or the threat that you could possibly be to the community. Judges often will decide not to allow that.
And let's kind of talk about his bond. Now, initially it was $2 million. Then a judge dropped it to $750,000. Is that pretty typical for a murder for hire charge? Normally we see a lot of cases where defendants face this exact same charge, but yet sometimes they're remanded until trial. But in this case, Yella Beezy was issued a $750,000 bond, and he put the money up too.
Yeah, it's not uncommon for us to see this, and it really depends on the judge that the case is in front of, how conservative the judge may be or how liberal the judge may be. That's one thing to consider. Not only that, but when it comes to bail, and specifically with murder charges, oftentimes judges will opt to hold the individual no bail, no release, which means that the person is going to be detained until they have their trial date. The other option that judges often take in murder cases is they set a significantly high bail. Bail is supposed to be there to ensure the defendant's return to court, but in my opinion and in my experience, we see judges setting this high bail because the likelihood of somebody being able to post that amount is very unlikely. And so that will ultimately keep them in custody until their trial date as well. But Mr. Beezy has the means to do it and ultimately did bond out.
In your opinion, do you think prosecutors have enough to convict Yella Beezy for allegedly hiring Kewon White to kill Mo3 back in 2020?
It's going to depend on how the evidence unfolds at trial. There are certainly key pieces of evidence that the prosecution is in possession of, including video footage, and I would assume possibly some communication or correspondence between the two. And so it's going to depend on if the prosecution can get those in and if they can meet their high burden of proof, which is guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Also, what could possibly come into question is if Mr. White ultimately were to cooperate and testify against Mr. Beezy. That will be one question that we will wait to find out and see as trial begins to loom in this case. So that's going to depend. They have a significantly high burden of proof in this case. I don't know how clear-cut the evidence is. I know there's video footage that shows what appears to be Mr. White or could possibly be Mr. White murdering this individual on a highway in Texas. That will certainly be a key piece of evidence at trial. And whatever causal link the prosecution will be able to show connecting Mr. Beezy to Mr. White will certainly come into evidence if they can lay the proper foundation to do that. So say, for example, if it were to be text correspondence or something of that sort, having the appropriate persons testify so that that information can come in. If the prosecution can get it in, I think there's a possibility that we'll see a conviction in this case. And if not, then there's definitely going to be a not guilty verdict that comes back.
And Mo 3 was murdered nearly 5 years ago now, but Yella Beezy wasn't arrested until last month. Why do you think his arrest came so late when the alleged shooter and his accomplice were arrested weeks after the shooting? So again, this was back in 2020, yet Yella Beezy wasn't arrested or even indicted until just last month.
Yeah, I've noticed over time with cases like this, especially murder for hire cases, over time people talk. So while this case at its inception 5 years ago resulted in the arrest of Mr. White and another individual, that Mr. White, I believe, has already been sentenced, federally speaking, in connection with this case or possibly another case. But there is another co-defendant to Mr. White who is still awaiting sentence. That could be the possible reason. Maybe he had shared some information that implicated Mr. Beezy. That could be a possibility, not to say that it did happen. Or other information, just people corresponding throughout the years, maybe an admission. I don't know if Mr. Beezy, maybe said in a song, implicated his own self in a song, and prosecutors got a hold of that and maybe are trying to use that in his case. So it could be a number of reasons, but I always say over time with homicide cases like this, people talk, and as a result of that, it amps up investigators and they continue forward with these investigations.
Yeah, and I think what's always sad when we're dealing with these cases, especially involving rappers, especially involving people who came up, they were almost to the top of what could have been like a long-lasting career, then something like this happens. And I think it's always so sad because in this particular case, from the reports I've been reading, from some of the research I've been doing, it seems like beforehand, Yella Beezy and the victim, Mo 3, were friends. They were cool. Then something happened. One of Mo 3's friends was shot. They blamed Yella Beezy. Then Yella Beezy was shot at. They blamed Mo 3. And it just seems like this back and forth until it all culminated into Mo 3's murder on an interstate on I-35 in Dallas, Texas, back in 2020. But in terms of just the escalation and also just the nature of the offense at hand here, what are your thoughts overall, especially on the brutality level when, obviously, when people deal with conflict, the first thing sometimes in other people's minds is not to grab a gun, not to kill somebody, but obviously that's not necessarily street code. But in terms of just this escalation from two rappers who started off cool, what are your thoughts overall of how we're even here in the first place?
We see this happen time and time again, and I don't know why it happens. I think ego, finances, money and power and respect, those all factor into how these things ultimately can happen, is where you have two people who are friends, somebody's offended, shots are fired, and somebody's dead, and there's been back and forth with that. We've heard it before. For example, in the Little Dirk case, there's an allegation of something similar in nature, where there's an allegation that somebody was ultimately disrespected, there was a death, and now there's this back and forth between two groups of people, which is really unfortunate because nobody ever wins in those cases. One life is lost, to death, and the other life is lost to the criminal justice system. And these individuals, these artists, they go on to have great families, great success, and they're cut short because of prior decisions or alleged prior decisions. So it's very unfortunate.
Yeah, and it's truly just like a Shakespearean tragedy, it kind of feels like. And the alleged shooter, Kewon White, he's already serving time in federal prison, like we had mentioned, for the gun charges. But then he got on live and he said that he's coming home soon. Do you think that he's embellishing for those who were just viewing that live that day? Or do you think it's possible that the case might be falling apart?
With respect to Mr. White, he certainly could be embellishing. He's already serving a federal sentence at this point in time. He's got a date for release. I don't know what that is as of right now. Could it be soon? Sure. But oftentimes what happens is, people are sentenced and then, they want to exercise within right their appellate challenges. And so maybe if he's challenged his case at the appellate level and there may be some issue with how the case proceeded before his plea or sentence, he could be challenging that, which could result in him coming home early. A lot of times I've seen people just simply, in good faith, or in good hope, I should say, say to people, I'm coming home soon, I'll be home soon, just to kind of keep that manifestation in mind that they may actually be home soon when they really may not. So it's going to depend.
Yeah, because even 9 years from 2022, that means he still has 6 years to serve, technically. Doing quick math, that's what, 2031, if I'm correct, when his earliest release date could actually be. And again, these are federal charges, and the feds make you stay until your time is done. But in terms of Yella Beezy himself, you are obviously a criminal defense attorney. That's why I love having you on. But if you were Yella Beezy's defense attorney, how are you defending your client? It seems like time kind of is on the defense's side, but not knowing, what the prosecution may have in their pocket.
Absolutely. Time is most definitely on the defense's side. Every time and any time a case is held out this far, it's usually better for the defense. There's a number of reasons. People are more likely to forget things as cases progress throughout the years. I hate to say it this way, but witnesses die or become incapacitated, maybe even police witnesses or other witnesses that would be necessary for the prosecution to use to prosecute the case. Also, again, and this is going to be the crux of the importance of this case, is how is the prosecution going to make that causal connection between Mr. Beezy and Mr. White? How can they do it? Is it through text messages? Who are they going to move these text messages in, through what witness, if they exist? Or is there some sort of jailhouse snitch that is going to be cooperating and had more information to provide law enforcement? And so, that's going to factor in too. And say, for example, if we do have some sort of jailhouse snitch or something like that, then what promise did this person receive in exchange for providing the information that they did? So it's going to go to their credibility as well. So there's a lot of things that are going to factor in. I think the process, as long as the defense, they crack at, they can't make any connection, they can't prove the case. Mr. Beezy knows a ton of people. He's had a ton of people in his entourage. He doesn't direct anybody. He's just responsible for his own self and his own music. Whatever somebody else may have done was on them. And if they can't make that link, then the jury's got to come back not guilty on this.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how this all kind of plays out in court once we do get a trial date, whenever that may be. But again, for now, Yella Beezy remains at home on home confinement, and unfortunately for him, can't go to his son's football games either. Safa, thank you so much for your time and your insight into this case. Before we sign you off, though, do you think that we could see a Yella Beezy murder for hire trial this year, or do you think possibly we won't even see it until maybe next year or the year after that?
Mr. Beezy has a right to a speedy trial, so in theory, we should see that case proceed to trial this year. Whether or not the court is backed up, dockets are, delayed, or trials are delayed for other calendar reasons, will be a question, but I think there's a very good possibility that we will see this case to trial this year.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether or not Yella Beezy goes on trial first, Lil Durk goes on trial first. Who knows if Diddy gets a verdict? Not that all of these cases are connected by any means, but we have a lot of big trials that we are keeping our eyes out for. Again, Safa Robinson-Ferrer, thank you so much for your time and your insight into this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Again, no trial date just yet for Yella Beezy, but according to online records, there is a hearing set to take place on May 5th. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.